Have you ever noticed that the clearer your instructions become, the more confused the people around you seem to look? Have you ever noticed that the clearer your instructions become, the more confused the people around you seem to look? It is a specific, recurring glitch in your daily architecture. You are sitting across from a colleague, or perhaps a subordinate. You are explaining a concept that, to you, is as solid and visible as the table between you. You lay out the geometry of the problem. You define the variables. You speak in plain, unadorned English. You watch their eyes. You see the nod. You see the mechanical rhythm of agreement. But then, there is a microsecond of hesitation, a vacancy in the pupil. And in that moment, you realize they haven't heard a single word of meaning. They heard sound. They heard syntax. But they did not see the image you projected. It feels like you are screaming behind soundproof glass. This isn't just annoying, it is physically disorienting. It triggers a low-grade anxiety, a vibration in the chest that asks, am I speaking a dead language, or has the world suddenly lost the ability to process logic? You try again. You simplify. You use metaphors. And the gap only widens. The harder you push the data, the more corrupted the file becomes upon arrival. You walk away from these interactions not with anger, but with a cold sense of isolation. You feel like a radio tower broadcasting on a frequency that no consumer hardware can receive. This is not a personal failing. It is not that you are bad at speaking. It is not that they are stupid. It is a structural flaw in the human operating system. To understand why you are invisible, we must look at a cold piece of data from 1990. A Stanford University graduate student named Elizabeth Newton designed a game. It was simple, almost childish, but it exposed a terrifying defect in the human mind. She divided people into two groups, tappers and listeners. The tappers were given a list of 25 well-known songs, classics like Happy Birthday or The Star-Spangled Banner. Their job was to tap out the rhythm of the song on a wooden table. No humming, no singing, just the dry mechanical impact of knuckle on wood. The listeners had to guess the song based solely on those taps. Before the experiment began, Newton asked the tappers to predict the success rate. The tappers were confident. They could hear the song perfectly in their heads as they tapped. The rhythm seemed unmistakable. They predicted that the listeners would guess correctly 50% of the time, 1 in 2, a coin flip, reasonable odds. But when the experiment concluded, reality presented a different number. The listeners did not guess 50%. They didn't even guess 20%. The actual success rate was 2.5%. Let that number sink in, 2.5. The tappers thought they were communicating effectively 1 time out of 2. In reality, they were getting through 1 time out of 40. This is not a margin of error. This is a complete break from reality. This is the mathematical proof of your isolation. Why does this gap exist? Why were the tappers so delusional? It wasn't arrogance. It was a neurological inevitability. When a tapper taps, they do not just hear the knock on the wood. In their mind, the full orchestra is playing. They hear the melody, the lyrics, the pitch, the emotional swell of the Star-Spangled Banner. The tapping is just a subtle accompaniment to the symphony in their head. But the listener has none of that. The listener has no access to the private server of the tapper's mind. They hear only Morse code without the cipher. They hear erratic, disjointed noise. This is the mechanism of your frustration. When you explain a project, a strategy, or a risk, you are the tapper. You have the background music. You have years of context, the unspoken history of the company, the technical nuances, the scars from previous failures. That is your symphony. It plays loudly in your head while you speak. You assume the person across from you hears it too. But they don't. They only hear the tapping. You are transmitting a compressed file, but you forgot to send the decryption key. You are pointing at a map that only exists on your retina. The tragedy is that once you know the song, it is physically impossible to unhear it. You cannot simulate ignorance. You cannot strip away the context to check if the rhythm stands on its own. You are trapped inside your own clarity. This phenomenon is formally known as the curse of knowledge. But in the brutal calculus of the professional world, we should call it the competence trap. We are taught that knowledge is power. We are taught that expertise grants influence. The mechanics suggest the opposite. As you climb the hierarchy, as you gain more data, more experience, and more insight, you are effectively adding layers of encryption to your output. You are not becoming a better leader. You are becoming a mute in the Tower of Babel. Think about the CEO who sends a cryptic 3-line email that sends the entire department into a panic. To him, the context was obvious. The background music was playing. To the staff, it was a random, terrifying noise. Think about the engineer who cannot explain why the bridge will fail, only that it feels wrong. He hears the structural groan. The manager only sees a budget spreadsheet. The more you know, the harder it is to speak to those who do not know. Your expertise does not build a bridge, it digs a moat. You become an alien species on your own planet. You look at your team and wonder why they are slow, why they lack urgency. They aren't slow. They are deaf to the frequency you are broadcasting on. You are suffering from nitrogen narcosis of the intellect. You have dove too deep. And if you try to drag them down to your level instantly, the pressure difference will kill the interaction. There is a secondary layer to this trap, one that is even more dangerous, the illusion of transparency. We operate under the false belief that our internal state is visible to the outside world. If we are worried, we assume our concern is written on our face. If we are urgent, we assume our pace communicates the deadline. This is a lie. Your internal state is a private room with no windows. When you are stressed about a quarterly target, you feel the adrenaline. You feel the weight. You speak quickly. You assume your team absorbs this urgency through osmosis. They do not. They just see a manager who is acting erratic. They do not feel the why. They only see the what. This leads to the most common failure in leadership, the solipsism of command. You believe that because you see the iceberg, everyone else is already steering the ship away from it. So you don't give the order to turn. You just stand on the bridge and wait for them to react to a danger they cannot see. And when the impact comes, you blame them for negligence. You blame them for lack of foresight. But you were the only one with the binoculars. You were the only one hearing the warning siren. To them, the sea was calm until the moment the hull breached. This is not a failure of their vision. It is a failure of your transmission. So, how do you survive this? How do you stop being a ghost in your own life? There is no pill to take. There is no easy hack. The only way out is a painful, manual override of your own instincts. You must learn to turn off the music. When you speak, you must pause and actively suppress the symphony playing in your head. You must force yourself to remember what it felt like before you knew the answer. This is not about dumbing it down. That is a lazy term used by arrogant people. This is about translation. It requires a cold, tactical empathy. You must run a simulation in your mind. If I had zero access to the history of this file, what would these words mean to me? You will find that your sentences are full of holes. You will find that your obvious conclusions are actually wild leaps of logic. You must build the steps manually, one by one, even if they seem redundant to you. You are not a conductor leading an orchestra anymore. You are a cryptographer sending a one-time pad to an agent in the field. Every variable must be defined. Every assumption must be stated. It is slow. It is tedious. It feels inefficient. But it is the only way to be real. The alternative is to remain in the tower, tapping on the desk, wondering why the world refuses to sing along. The choice is yours. You can be right or you can be understood. You rarely get to be both.